Welcome to Inside Abode, ladies and gentlemen. How y'all doing? I'm your host, Dave Jones. I appreciate you being here. Thank you for tapping in. Thank you for even just listening. I'm always amazed that we have listeners that listen to us every single week, and I just hope that you get value out of this, and I hope that it's worth your time. So before I get into today's guest, I am going to ask you to subscribe, hit that like button or something. I don't even think there's a like button on here, but do subscribe. Hit the like button if you're watching it on YouTube. And we're going to talk about a really important thing actually today that is going to happen on January 1st. And we'll be talking a little bit more in depth about that. And actually, I'm going to just introduce my guest before I get going, because I don't want you to sit here awkwardly for people watching on YouTube. My guest today is a realtor of 18 and a half years. She's built a business from scratch. Got it out the mud, and really has built a really just kick-ass business. You've been in Abode now for how long? How long you been in Abode for?
4 years.
4 years. Wow, that has gone really fast.
Yeah.
Heidi Hurst of the Heidi Hurst Team, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
How you doing?
Thank you. I'm good. I'm excited to have this conversation, bring it up to the forefront, and then hopefully open some dialogue with some buyers and sellers and other agents in the marketplace. Right.
No, I mean, I think it's important. It's something that we've been talking about for quite some time now.
Right.
But, as I ask around, I'm asking people how they think it's going to impact or anything like that. But
Right.
I don't know. I get a bunch of different answers because there's a lot to digest. And so for today, what I'm going to tell people, or I'm going to preface this conversation with, is that we're all still learning. This is not something that has happened in our industry yet. And so we are wrapping our arms around it as best we can and getting all the information so that we can then serve our clients to the best of our ability. So we're going to talk about this. We might be off on some things. We might. I don't think we are, but because we've been studying it so much, or you guys have been studying a lot. I'm just overseeing it from layman's terms, and how it's going to impact y'all and how we can help you. So that's where I'm coming from. So the thing that we're talking about is new agency, like real estate brokerages and real estate in general in our industry. We've been doing things one way, and now we have this change that has actually started back in 2019 with the Northwest MLS, when we've started trying to decouple the commissions, and by that, meaning that the seller does not pay. I think I'm going down the road too far. Let's just talk about agency.
Okay.
Let's just talk about agency. I'm going down the road.
There's so much to talk about that it's hard to kind of rein it in and say.
Yeah, because I'm trying to remember that the people that some people might listen and might not understand even all of the background context of that. So can you tell me a little bit about just real estate agency and just agency law in general, how it stands?
Well, what I like to tell my sellers, and especially since 2019, when the Northwest MLS was really forward thinking, we are what's called a cooperative multiple listing service. And so we all of our brands and brokerages work together, and we joined this special club called the Northwest MLS. So they've been really forward thinking about this. So in 2019, we started advertising buyer broker compensation. People call us agents. Let's just dumb it down. People call us agents, but we're actually brokers. They changed the law, I think back in the teens. And so we're not called agents anymore. We're called brokers. So if we say brokers, understand that. I'm a managing broker. We have many managing brokers in our office, which just means we can supervise other brokers. So that's kind of the difference between agent and broker. So now I've gone down that rabbit hole. So what I tell my clients is before 1996, every real estate professional who was working in the marketplace represented the seller. Mm-hmm. And they realized in 1996 that that wasn't really fair to buyers, because I'd be out showing Dave Jones a house, and I'd be like, Dave, I got you, man. I'm going to write your offer, and I'm going to take care of you. But guess what? All of my agency under state law was to take care of the seller. And back then it was a fiduciary duty. It's no longer that. But so they said, oh, wait a minute, this is misleading to the public. So we are going to be forward thinking, and we are going to say, now we're going to create what's called buyer's agency. And when you represent us, our office represents a seller, I represent a seller, we have a signed contract that says, here are the expectations for us as brokers and the firm. Here are the expectations of the seller as we move through this process. But as a buyer's agent, we were just buyer's agents kind of by default. Yeah. And so I would start showing you a house, Dave, and you would say, okay, like Heidi's got our best interest, and that would be true because I was performing buyer agency duties.
And that seems kind of unfair. Like, sorry to stop you right there. Yeah. Like the whole seller thing. So you mean to tell me we were going down, like we've sold all this real estate this whole time, right, and it wasn't up until that point that the buyer had like actual real right, representation, like right, like legally. Right. That just seems kind of crazy to think right, about. Yeah. Like that the seller, everything was in the seller's best interest. Right, exactly. Before 1996.
Well, of course. So if I'm working as a buyer's agent or I'm working representing a buyer, but all my duty is to the seller paid both my responsibility as representing the buyer, or not representing, writing an offer for a buyer, and the seller, right? So the seller paid the bulk of the compensation for the buyer, the person who represented the buyer, and their own broker. Yeah. Well, in 1996, they didn't change how buyers' representation was going to be paid for. So, since 1996 and forward, the seller, it's been kind of an expectation that the seller is going to pay for both their broker, who's representing them, who's marketing their home, who's negotiating on their behalf, and they're paying for the buyer-broker compensation. Now, the reality of that is where if a buyer has to come and back in the day put 20% down and pay for their lender to do their loan and then pay for their buyer broker compensation, like nobody really kind of thought that next step through. Yeah. So there's been some stuff in the news, and the news is very dramatic, and there's a lot of things that have been happening in our real estate industry across the country. So back in 2019, the Northwest MLS said, hey, we're going to start advertising what the buyer broker compensation is so that the buyer is aware, because there are people in our industry, when the buyer said, well, wait a minute, Heidi, how are you going to get paid if you're representing me? There are some brokers who'd say, oh, it's free. Well, it's not free. It's never been free. The seller's been paying for it. So now there's been an expectation of, here's what Heidi is going to get paid to represent you, Dave Jones, and you can see that. Y'all can get out there on that thing called the internet, and you can. We advertise here in the Northwest MLS. We advertise what the buyer broker compensation is, so it's very transparent. And as we continue this conversation, we're going to talk more about transparency and what that expectation is for the buyer and for the seller as we move forward and talk about compensation. So.
Thank you for that breakdown, because I think that a lot of people don't understand, like that. Even agents don't understand the history behind like how we got here. Like, how did we even get to this point where we have to make these sweeping changes? And this reminds me, this moment in time reminds me of when I first got into education as an administrator, and they changed the way that teachers were being evaluated, and it was off the heels of No Child Left Behind with the Bush administration, because that was centered around test scores and the type of funding you'd get and all this other kind of stuff, whether we were going to close your school down or not. So you had all these people fearful, like, well, our test scores ain't that, so like, what, we being closed in 3 or 4 years? But the next part of that was like, all right, now we need to make sure that we're looking at the instruction and how are we evaluating that. And so it went from like a 3-point, metric to like a 38-point metric. And so people were just like, oh, like, oh, my whole job's going to change. Yep, it is, And so it was but I came in right at that time, so I didn't know anything different. I'd never done anything different. I did the 38, and that's all I knew. So, and it was really hard. Yeah. But it feels like this is a similar situation. So now with what's happening on January 1st, we've talked about that. Can you give just a brief overview of what that is? Like how does all that stuff you're going to do change?
So from 1996 until January 1st, 2024, as a buyer's broker, I would just like automatically default to being a buyer's agent if I was performing buyer's broker services to you. Mm-hmm. Now, we are required by the state law, thank you state law, and a statute. So it's RCW 18.86 if anybody's an attorney wants to take a look at that. Where before we perform buyer brokerage services, we have to have a contract with the buyer talking to them about how we are being compensated as a buyer's broker. So Dave, you're my buyer. We're going to sit down. I'm going to say, Dave, I am here for you. I'm going to represent you. I have experience. I know how to negotiate. I'm going to show you houses. You can find them on the internet, but I'm going to actually take you inside and open the door and show you and use my experience from my 1,000+ inspections I've been on to point out some things about this house. I tell people it's like dating. Shopping for a house is like dating, right? And I'm your best friend who's going to point out all the bad things about your house so that you can go into that making a logical decision, right? Because I've been on a lot of inspections. I know how to negotiate. I know how to negotiate in a recession when prices were falling dramatically. I know how to negotiate in a market where prices were appreciating and home prices were going up $50,000, $60,000. Alyssa and my team, we've had an in-depth conversation. So if I sit there and talk with you, Dave, and say, Dave, where do you work? Right? Before this, you were a school teacher, and you had a contract with the school district that said, hey, I'm Dave Jones. The school district said, this is the service we're going to provide for you. This is what you're going to do for us. Here's the agreement on how we're going to be compensated. And so now, because of this state law, we now as brokers get to say, I'm your buyer's broker, and I'm going to get paid for doing this great service for you. And here, again, are all the things I'm going to do. Go ahead. I like ask a question.
You like that face, huh? That face, you can't see it for those listening to audio. I'm making a face. So here's my question. So you mean to tell me that real estate agents who were representing buyers up until this point, up until January 1st, were working without a contract or anything? Because as we know on the list side, to take a listing live, you have had to sign a listing agreement, right? And
state law said you had to.
Yeah, and that talked about the compensation and all those things. So as a buyer's agent, you mean to tell me that you would go out and start working for people without even signing anything?
I did
for a $500,000 contract or $500,000 transaction or $300,000, whatever. It's still a lot of money. Anything's a lot of money.
Right.
That sounds really. It just doesn't make sense.
Right. I would agree. I would say in the last probably 5-7 years, I've been in the business 18 plus years. Probably the last 5-7 years, I've been pretty consistent with my buyer brokerage. We used to call them buyer brokerage agreements. Now they're going to be called buyer services agreements. Now, let's kind of step it back. So that's the law. The law says, hey, like if I'm going to work for you and provide you buyer brokerage services, you and I need to have an agreement in writing, a contract. It's going to say how I may be paid, whether you're going to help pay that, whether the seller's going to pay that. And so that's the contract. The other part of the law is that we have to, as we always have, provide to you this new law of real estate agency, right? It used to be like 6 pages. Now it's like this pretty 4-page. So before I even say, Dave, let's go look at this house, I am required by state law to provide this to you so that you can understand who's representing, what my obligations are to you, etc. Before I go show you a house, I need to have that contract signed as well, right? Because I would be breaking the state law by providing you brokerage services if we don't have an agreement signed. That's what the new law says.
I like that. I think I think it's great because like the word transparency, so that's going to be one that comes up multiple times in this conversation.
Right.
The reason why I like it is because it puts everything up in the forefront. It forces us to be more professional. And when we start providing these services, they are like our time is valuable. We've been going. That's why I asked that question before. I was like, so it just doesn't make sense because people should be paid for their time, right? And their not only their time, but their expertise. You know, like if you're walking through something, you can foresee some things that someone who hasn't walked through 50 houses that year might not see, right? And so that's valuable for someone, I would hope.
Absolutely.
So,
And if you are purchasing the most expensive thing you may ever purchase in your entire life, don't you want to have somebody who's a professional representing you, who is saying, here's what I charge? I mean, I've worked with attorneys. Attorneys hand you a contract and say, I'm going to perform this service for you. I'm good at what I do. And so sign this, and we're going to be tied together and talk about how we're both going to perform, and here's the expectation. So I think that that's really important for everybody to understand. And wouldn't you want to hire somebody who actually knows about the state law, who knows that they have to provide this to you, who understands what that compensation looks like, who does provide a full service to you, and not just you get to hit a button on the internet and somebody goes and shows you a house, who hasn't walked through 150 houses or negotiated through any of those things. So I think that it's really best for the consumer on both the listing side and both on the buyer side. I think it shows that we are a professional industry.
I agree. And I think this is probably, and we were talking about this before, this might be a two-part conversation, because there's the nuances to it too. But I just want to get into the general stuff, because, we can talk about, okay, well, so we had one side with the listing agreement. If we're going to, take a house live and you're going to represent the seller, cool. We had that process in place, and we negotiated the terms on that in terms of financially, like how you're going to get paid. Now we're doing that on both sides. And my next question is, what impact do you anticipate this having on both agents and buyers? We've kind of touched on it, but is this going to be something that you think really shifts things, or is it going to be something that we have to kind of get used to and it will evolve over time?
I think that it is great for both, because I think as a professional in this marketplace, it is my job and my responsibility to communicate what my service is to my client. This is not just everybody says, in real estate it's so easy to get your license. It's not easy to practice real estate, right? And so if I can sit there and articulate my value, then you should be interested in working with me, and I should also be interested in working with you. So I think as far as agents, that's the impact of it, right?
Yeah.
Fill out a form. I've taken 4 classes on this whole thing, because I want to make sure I'm clear from a couple of different angles on it. So somebody who's educated. I also think that for buyers don't understand. I don't think that consumers understand about real estate. They don't understand that I own my own business. I pay my own taxes. I pay for my car. When I take you out for coffee, that's Heidi Hurst. Unfortunately, that's not Windermere who's buying your coffee. And so all of the costs and expenses as a real estate professional owning a small business. I am a small business owner. Everybody at Abode is a small business owner. Dave Jones, you and Ann are small business owners. And so there's costs and associations with that. And so I think that for the consumer, understanding that a buyer's agent, a buyer broker is going to provide services to you and what those expectations are. I think starting with that conversation and then talking about the expectation, most buyers don't ask the question. I've helped so many people over so many years. Maybe I've had a handful of people ask me how I'm getting paid. They just don't know. So I think that this transparency with sellers and with buyers is vital to a successful industry, to a successful representation. So I don't think it's going to change too much for buyers, except they might start falling into the responsibility of helping to pay for their person that they're representing. Because the seller, up until December 31st, 2023, the seller has said, here's the compensation I'm going to provide in my listing. I am going to pay a buyer brokerage fee as part of this contract with Heidi Hurst and Windermere Abode. And we're going to have some more transparent conversations with sellers about their listings And so they will be paying or may not be paying a buyer brokerage compensation. So financially, that might change the way buyers look at our industry and understand that they may be responsible for actually paying for the professional that's representing them. So that's how it's going to affect buyers a bit. But there's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of education, like it's a new thing. So, Heidi and Dave and Abodes and the industry is trying to figure out the best way to communicate that. I would say in 2019, when we made the buyer brokerage compensation more transparent, there was a lot of angst in our real estate industry and a lot of discussion about it here at the Northwest MLS. And I would say that it hasn't changed what the seller's paying for a buyer brokerage compensation. This is kind of like a side, it's an important topic to talk about, but like the seller does not have to pay a buyer brokerage compensation. They can put 0 in there. And then the buyer, because they're going to have a contract, Dave, you and I are going to have a contract that says, here's the minimal amount of my compensation that I'm willing to be paid. And if the seller's not paying that minimal amount or 0, you, Dave, are going to be responsible for paying that to me. And so it's going to change the financial way we do real estate. And of course, it's not all caught up with everything. It's not caught up with can a buyer finance those closing, my compensation at this point? No, not really, especially if you're VA, which we do a ton of VA or FHA. So there's just some things we have to kind of sort through and practice and talk about. But I think that transparency for both the seller and for also the buyer is going to really help our industry be more, I don't want to say legitimate, because I think that helping people buy and sell homes is like the most important thing.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for all of that. That was a lot. So just to clarify, the seller can offer and say, like, so on the listing agreement, which we've always done, they say, hey, I'm selling this at X%.
Right.
And, or the X% is what the listing agent's going to get. And then we're going to offer this much. This is how much for buyer broker, whatever. So buyer broker comes along and their client likes the house, but it's not. The buyer broker has on their own, on the other end, negotiated saying, hey, this is what the least I'm going to work for. Then they find this house, they say, man, this is the one I want. And you look at the amount that the listing agent or the seller is willing to pay the buyer broker, and the buyer broker, it doesn't match up. So let's say there's a gap of, I don't know, 0.5%.
Right.
So that 0.5% has to be made up somehow, is what you're saying.
Right.
And that's on the buyer.
Not necessarily. There's a way that we can go in and negotiate that 0.5% with the seller through a purchase and sell agreement. So it's not necessarily that, but at least there's an expectation. And guess what, Dave Jones, my buyer, you can look online and say, hey, Heidi and I have this agreement at X dollar, at X percentage, and this house is offering less than. So I'm going to look at that and say, do I want to pay the difference? I want to go look at it, but now you are going to know that you may be responsible for paying that difference, whereas before you wouldn't have known that.
You wouldn't even know.
You wouldn't even know.
Yeah.
So now there's going to be a contract that says this. As a listing broker, I tell them the story about 1996 and before, and then now here's this, and now I've been even having more conversations around this. And the seller can say, seller, you can offer 0 all the way up to X percentage, whatever dollar amount you want. I would encourage you, because we have been advertising what the buyer brokerage services compensation is, that you can go and see what the houses around you that are for sale, what your relevant properties, your competition, what they're offering for a buyer brokerage compensation. And that cost is built into the price. And so let's have this transparent conversation. But seller, you now have to do your due diligence. And then so that you can come at this with a fully big picture of what your financial obligation could be and how you may set yourself apart from the market or not, or be in competition with it. Interesting.
Yeah, that's the words I keep hearing that we're going in between is services and compensation. And so those are the two things that I hear and I just that are connected here. And in terms of a buyer's agent, like the listing agent or listing broker side is easy to see the value of,
Right.
like prepping the listing, getting it on the market, doing the photos, you can see, you can articulate and see. That's a really easy one to see. For a buyer's agent, a buyer's broker, if you will, like it's a little more it's harder to see for your average client, because we always say, and and this is in the real estate space more than any, who you work with matters, and all this stuff, like all these like little catchphrases, and I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like, that doesn't tell me anything. I mean, it tells me something. Like, yeah, thank you, that's helpful. And what does that mean? Can you go a little bit more into that?
Sure. I think at our meeting this week, Anne was giving a quote. I don't have my glasses on, so I can't look at it, but there's a quote that most buyers really wanted to understand the process of buying a home. They really wanted that education. And so when Alyssa and I meet with our new buyers and or repeat buyers, we spend a good hour and a half having a discussion with them, explaining what the process is. Our conversation might be a little bit longer now that we have a contract that we have to sign, as before we have that conversation. And so that education part of understanding that. And then, I'm trying to come up with an example of, let's see, you go to a doctor, you've got a pain, and you're like, okay, you were referred to me, doctor, and so I'm going to come to you with this problem, and you have all the education and the knowledge to be able to guide me through what my next step should be and give me my options. And I think as a buyer's broker, we offer that. We also offer that education, their responsibility in this contract, what a contract means, what are your options in this contract, and then we go out and look at houses. And like everybody's house is open 24 hours, 7 days a week on the internet, walking up to a house, walking into a house. Again, it's like dating. You got to sit down in front of somebody. He may look good online, but it's you actually sit down and have a conversation. You actually get into a house. You see the light. You see the neighbors, because we're really good at like cropping out the neighbor who's got all the 500 dogs in the backyard or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So you really have to experience the house. You need to have a broker who understands like what your body language is, what you're thinking about, ask the right questions. And then you get into talking about negotiating a contract, if this is the one. Alyssa and I talk people out of houses all the time, right? Had a client who wanted a house with a dining room because her grandmother left her dining room table. I love this house. Okay, I'm like, okay, let's go back to the office. Back in the day, we used to meet people at the office, right? Yeah. And I'm like, okay, before we go, there is no dining room in this house. Oh, yeah, that's okay. I'll make it right. By the time we got to the office, she was like, no, can't do it. No dining room.
Gotta have that.
So somebody who clearly explains what they want, and then we are accountable to them. We ask them the questions. We're not telling them no. We're trying to get them to think about that and not just sell them a house. Sell them the house that they really want and point out the things so they can make an educated decision.
What you're just talking about right now is the tip of the iceberg. That's what people, and that's where that's why I asked the question, because I'm like, we do a really good job at this part, because yes, we can match make, and we do that very well, right? And then that's when, like, let's say then you get under contract, you find the one, whatever, and most people don't realize that's when your job actually starts, because especially now more than ever, because back when we were talking about the agency stuff back then, the book of the listings was sitting here in the office, and it was not on the internet, so no one had access to the houses that you could see, so you had to use the real estate office. Well, once that went away, and now you can go online and search in your bed at any time of the day, I feel like consumers feel like that's the job that we do. And it's like, actually, all the stuff we've talked about, negotiating, knowing other agents, being collaborative with other agents is very helpful.
Answering the phone.
Answering
the phone.
But then you get under contract, and then you have another 30, 45, however long, many days you need to do. That's where the rubber meets the road to me. Personally.
You have to negotiate through an inspection. You have to set expectations on an inspection. You have to have a connection with with a title and escrow company. We play well with everybody. You have to understand what title is. You have to be able, as a real estate professional, read through a title report and see if there's anything that's glaring. Communicate with the title and escrow company to see if they see anything that's glaring.
Right.
You need to work with the lender as a broker, because most buyers don't understand the lending process, and so you've got to talk with the lender. Have you ordered the appraisal? Have they signed their disclosures within the timeline? There's a lot of, like, we call it don't be a secret agent. There's a lot of stuff that we do in the background to make sure that our process goes seamlessly.
Right. And
to answer any questions. It's a very stressful situation. And when you can normalize and give perspective and to say, this is reasonable, right? Your request is reasonable. If the seller is not going to be reasonable on this, then they're going to have to deal with that. And so maybe this is just not the house that you're going to need to purchase, right? Or you work through that conversation with the other agent and say, here's what the issue is, here's why they're asking for this, and like giving the nuance, the conversations. I spend a lot of time on the phone. People want to text, but if you don't pick up that phone and, if you have a good reputation in the marketplace, I know Abode, our office, has a good reputation. I would love to think that I have a great reputation in the marketplace. So working with somebody who has the experience, that when they see that Heidi Hurst is calling, or that, Ann Jones is calling, or Mello Hogan is calling, because, we're in this market, that we have that opportunity to be like, okay, this is somebody who's a full-time real estate professional.
Right.
They know how to negotiate through this. And so it takes that. We are the backstop for the emotions, and we are the professionals that's going to guide you through this process.
As I hear you say this, I know there's some people that think this is just about numbers, and it might be for like an investor type or something, but we're mostly residential real estate at our office. And so have you ever been through a transaction, or just someone helped someone buying a house and provided services where they did not get emotional about anything throughout the whole thing?
No.
You laugh. And I'm asking that question because I already know the answer to it. And that's the part that I feel like we don't consider. And it's not human nature to foresee some of that. You say like, oh, I'm going to buy this house. It's going to be cool. All right, if this happens, we're good. But then you start getting in negotiation, and we're competitive as adults. And then you have money. And you might get in a transaction where you're negotiating over $1,000 sink, and it's a $900,000 house, and folks is ready to walk, and I'm like, yo, hold up, let's slow down.
Bigger picture.
Big picture. Let's look at the big picture. Yeah. So I guess so it's just fascinating to hear you say all of that. What I hear is just a lot of like, you have to be multiple things. You have to look at you have to navigate people away from potholes that they might be seeing, or mines, or whatever you want to, whatever analogy you want to use. You have to also help coach through the emotions of the process as well. You have to look at the numbers. Does it met? You have to work with the other agent to negotiate on numbers and things of that nature. There's just a lot, and that's why I say like people. I feel like the consumers just see the front end.
Right.
And I was like, that's where it starts, because the rest of the hard stuff is like in between the lines, like I like to say. Now you're in between the lines, and now we have deadlines and things to meet, and that's what I mean by lines.
Though I will say, I'm going to digress a little. I have one thing I have to say, Dave, is that if I walk into a house with a buyer and I can see that there is an issue, then I can bring that to their attention and say, I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm not a professional. This to me seems like, in my experience, a red flag. I'm saving my client $800 for an inspection, right? Or if there's water in the basement, there's money to be that can fix that, right? But do they have those resources? Working with a professional, walking through a house can save the consumer money. Because if you have that experience, you can share that with your client, and whether they choose to move forward or not, you've brought it up, and then they're making a decision whether they want to write an offer on this house.
Yeah.
Because if they don't have the X amount of dollars to fix the water in the basement, then why should they like move forward with an inspection and deposit earnest money and work on all of that? So you've got to get to know that buyer in that buyer conversation that you're having, that relationship that you're building with them. So that's all I'm going to say on that. It's getting into the house and using that professional's experience will save you money in the long run. That's all. Yeah. I have to argue on that.
No, we said we wouldn't get into the weeds, but here we are. But I think it's important to talk about all of this stuff because this is when we talk about this rule or this law. It's not a rule; it's a law. It's a literal law that's coming in. So everyone has to abide by it. Yep, Washington State law. Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about this, that I think these are all we're talking about our value. And what is our value? So when you're sitting down and you're signing this paper with the buyer,
right.
And I think of it like this. Someone, we had a good question. I had a good chat with someone, and he asked me like, "What's your product? What's the product that Windermere Abode sells?" And I was just like, "That's a really good question." And I said, "Well, it's our agents. Our agents are the quote unquote product,
right.
Like not in an inhumane way, you know what I mean? But like that's what we try to do. We put you out there because you're the star. You guys are the stars. You do the thing that is so special. Mm-hmm. And I would say, what's the product for you as an agent?
Right. Product is my experience, my curiosity. Mm-hmm. I love learning new things, so I'm taking 4 classes on this topic because I'm curious about it and I want to know. I'm a professional, so it's me.
Yeah, it's your service.
It's my experience. It's what I know. It is how I'm going to help you is my service. How am I going to educate you and explain things to you so that you understand what this whole big thing is. I'm going to talk to you about the hard stuff, which is money. People... Like sometimes as a buyer's agent before, and I was new, I wouldn't ask because I didn't trust my value in this process. So I wouldn't ask for my compensation. I wouldn't have somebody sign a buyer services agreement or a buyer brokerage agreement. And so,
but a doctor or a lawyer don't have no problem asking for their service for compensation for their services. A fireman 100%. Don't. A police officer don't.
Teachers don't.
Teachers, right? Everybody, anybody. Shoot, the person I'm finna go to the corner store, and that person at the register. I'm providing you a service. I get paid. But like, here's why I think that product question is so important is because when we frame it that way, like a lot of times the first thing that'll come out of an agent's mouth is the house, and so if that's what we're saying. Mm-hmm. And that's what the consumer is thinking too. That's why the question comes up when the percentage of commission comes up. Well, why am I paying you? This is the product. The product is the house. Why am I paying you? If the product is the house, you know what I mean? Right. And so I think if we can shift that mindset and that framing to like, no, the product is my service. Like I'm helping you get this thing that, and there's all these things that there's all these moving parts within that process.
Right.
So,
and I'm willing to have a hard conversation, right? Mm-hmm. When I was newer, I wouldn't have a hard conversation with you. I mean, that was a long time ago. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have the hard conversations with my clients. I start out all of my conversations with my sellers, like, let's talk about the money. That's why we're selling this house, because you need to know if you have the money to move to the next place or to settle this or to sort things out. Let's talk about the money. And so as a buyer's broker in the last, 7 years, I can sit down and say, let's talk about the money. I can articulate my value. There are some other brokers out there who are newer and they just don't have that quite yet. They have the best of intentions. They're taking the classes, they're educating themselves, and they probably have mentors in their office. So if you are a newer agent or an agent and you're wondering what should I do about this? Take classes, talk to your peers. We were in a class yesterday at the office and brilliant ideas. I was telling Alyssa, brilliant ideas, right? That was so good. We're like, it's really good, right? Sharing, collaborating, being in an office where you can collaborate with people about these topics. And people, just, God, be curious, grow, educate yourself. So
And I imagine that's what you would tell other agents in general. Like, is that what you would tell other agents that are getting ready to adapt as we get ready to turn the page on this year? And
Yeah. Well, I would say just level up. Like,
yeah,
level up here. Like, our industry, we all need to level up. And if you're not leveling up, then you shouldn't be in this. You're helping people buy and sell the biggest thing they will ever buy and sell, except maybe college, debt. But I think that, I think that buyers should be represented. I think that everybody should have agency representation. I'm passionate about that. And
For
everybody should be represented in our industry. So, anyway.
I think this is a great spot to bookmark this, because I want to stay general on this podcast, because I think we're going to have some future podcasts on what if this happens, then how does this work, or how does this work, because this is a new thing for us. And so but I do think it's important that as of January 1 that the public knows that we've been talking about this since 2019,
Right.
but also it's been a process. We started talking about it in 2019, had a pandemic, and the world stopped, and so kind of had to start start worrying about some other things at that moment.
Right.
But this conversation never stopped, though.
Right.
At least within our firm, it did not. And so because I think it's the best change that this industry's seen in a long time, and it's very necessary. And I think that not all buyers, brokers are the same. Not all agents are the same. Not all brokerages are the same. And by that, I mean some are better than others. And that's just the reality. I'm not even going to I'm not even going to front. Like, there's basketball. We sit here and watch sports, and some teams are better than others. Some teams stink, and other ones don't. And that's just the facts, right? I like to think that we're a very good brokerage, and we try to practice and be good at things.
100%.
We always have room to grow, of course. So I guess my last question to you as we bookmark this, for buyers and sellers, just casual people who have no idea before this podcast that this is even happening, what's the thing that you want to leave them with, that maybe they should just keep in their mind as they go off?
Right. I think that the real estate industry is just focusing on being more transparent about costs and expectations, and that everybody should be represented and work with a professional, an experienced professional. If you have questions, reach out to a real estate agent, broker, or I say agent. Reach out and ask questions, right? Listen to this podcast again. Reach out to anybody in our office.
I have a feeling some people are going to be rewinding this.
Yeah.
I might listen to this one in regular speed. I usually listen to podcasts in 1.5 speed, because I like to just listen to them fast. But
yeah. I appreciate the conversation. May not have been perfect, but I think we grasped a lot of it.
We nailed that. We nailed that. Like, we still got a ways to go. High five. All right. So that brings us to the next segment, hot take. You've done hot take before.
I've done hot take.
But let's we're gonna end on some hot take, and we'll see what answers we have. All right. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Christmas or Thanksgiving?
Oh, Christmas. Presents. Sparkle. Done.
That was the quickest answer I think we've
Family. Yeah, all of it.
Fog or rain?
Fog.
Really?
Yeah, rain.
I literally could not see. Oh, so it's your hair. Okay, with the rain. Got it. Mm-hmm. Your hair does not like the rain.
Does not like the rain. No, it expands.
Candy or chocolate? I mean, chocolate is candy, but you know what I mean, like hard candy or chocolate.
Probably
Starburst.
chocolate. Yeah.
Chocolate?
Mm-hmm. Chocolate. Yeah. Caramel, nuts. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
No funky fruit flavors.
Oh, really?
No. No chocolate and fruit. Not for me.
Man.
Yeah.
Gifts or experiences?
Experiences. Yeah. No hesitation.
You're very decisive today.
Yes, I
am. The old way or the new way? That's a really vague one, but.
I would say the new way. I would just say the new way, because it's based on something old, and it's change, and it's growth, being curious. So I'm going to say that.
I love the new way. I'm just all about evolving. I always have been an early adopter. I've always been trying to put people onto stuff. So yeah, I agree with you on that one.
Yeah,
like,
I know.
I do like the old way too. I'm not saying that you have to change everything. I'm not saying that, but
yeah.
Evolution.
I like a little bit of chaos, Dave. That's why I'm in real estate. So, there you go.
All right. Well, thank you for today. Thank you for taking time out of your day. Especially, I know it's busy right now, and there's just stuff going on, or you're trying to relax and not think about real estate for a little bit. I hope
both right now. Yeah.
And so, I just really appreciate you coming on and talking about this and being brave, because it's something that that it's new to all of us. And so, just wrapping your head around it. And I think the best thing we can do is sit here and talk about it and chew on it and get better. So that's the only way we're going to get better at it. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David.
How do people get in touch with you if they have more questions, or they want
well, you can find me, Heidi Hurst, real estate agent. You can put that on the Googler. You can call me or email me, Heidi at HeidiHurstTeam.com. And you can find me on Instagram. I have two. I have my business one, which is Heidi Hurst Team, if you search that, or you can find me Heidi Hurst 253. So yeah, most of my clients are on my personal ones, and most of my real estate professionals are on my business one. So you can find me on both. Yeah.
You're everywhere. You're everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, we'll link those down in the comments below, and thank you for listening. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are out of here. Have a happy holidays. Have a happy new year. If I don't hear from you before that, I don't know. We might have a hot take. It might be before or after the new year. I'm not all the way sure, but I'll be taking some time off. So anyway, with that, hope you learned something. Rewind it, and thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Peace.